ladies and gentlemen, I'm Penn Bowers, the Vice President and Program Chairman for the Madison County Historical Society. We welcome you here today for our second program on the Great Flood in Madison County in 1995. First program we had, the speaker was Dr. Scott Eaton. He's a geologist from James Madison University. Did his doctoral thesis on the flood in 1995 in Madison. And it was a great presentation, and he talked about the science behind the storm, and he also spoke with a PowerPoint about the geology and the causes of it and the geology of the landscape after. Unfortunately, the program went rather long, so we didn't have a chance to let people speak about their particular memories of the flood. And there were many, of course, and so today is a program to remedy that situation. Today we will show a short video beforehand, but we'll have 5 individuals up here on the stage who had specific parts in the storm occurrence, and they will be introduced, each one by Nan Coppage. And after that, if they say their piece, we'll have some people scattered over the lawn who have been handpicked. You know, they have agreed to speak about some particular portion of the storm and the flood that they experienced. And so they would be given a mic to, let's say that. And after that, we will maybe have time to pass the mics around for anybody that has any particular memory or remark they would like to make, or if they want to ask a question of somebody in here, particularly the people on the stage. Okay? So, with that in mind, we'll start with the video, and then we'll have the people come on stage.
The rain did not stop. It was like a Chinese water torture 10,000 times over.
I was getting scared about what was surrounding the house.
It was just like a train locomotive, a very, very loud roaring sound.
Suddenly I have a creek running through my house that wasn't there before.
A helicopter was the only way that these folks were going to get out of the area.
It was a time of reckoning because this might be your last moments on Earth.
From the Weather Channel, this is Storm Stories with meteorologist Jim Cantori.
June 27, 1995, torrential rains battered the rolling farmland in Madison County, Virginia, an area in the Blue Ridge Mountains, 100 miles northwest of Richmond. The intense thunderstorms are triggered by warm, moist air from the Atlantic Ocean that heads up the slopes of the mountains. In Charlottesville, at the University of Virginia, Pat Michaels is a state climatologist. He researches the impact of weather and knows too much rain can cause devastating landslides.
The water actually gets underneath the soil, vegetation cover on the mountain, and a lot of what was on the side of the mountain comes down and causes all kinds of damage, to say the least.
Now, on the eastern side of the mountain range, some residents are about to get slammed by several debris slides. In the small town of Graves Mill, Randall Lillard is at home with his foster daughter. The 56-year-old farmer knows the menacing storm is a threat to his corn crop and century-old house.
You could almost reach up and touch the slab. It was dog. Kind of gave you a bad feeling.
Lillard videotapes the downpour. Around 10:30 a.m., his wife Ruth decides to leave early from her job at the local post office.
It was absolutely pouring. The river was coming up, and I knew I wanted to be home.
Once she's inside the house, Ruth phones her daughter-in-law, Claire. Claire's home is a half-mile away on the edge of the Rapidan River. Claire's husband is at work, and Ruth convinces her to bring her 1-year-old daughter and 3-year-old son to the farmhouse.
I was packing a bag with, videos and diapers and those types of things to go have a rainy afternoon at the in-laws' house. And when we went up to their house, we realized it was a much more dangerous situation.
Minutes after they arrive, floodwater spills into the yard and quickly surrounds the house. The Lillards discover that their home isn't the safe haven they thought it was.
The water just started coming up through the floor, and so we started moving furniture to the front part of the house to keep it from getting messed up.
High on top of the mountain, a massive debris slide breaks loose. It collects water, mud, trees, and boulders as it races down the slope. It's moving over 20 miles an hour on a crash course with the Lillards' home. Ruth is looking out her kitchen window at the exact moment the debris flow slams into the back of her house.
The whole window was black and the glass was breaking in, and I just turned and hollered, everybody get out in front.
It was like a train hit the house. We could hear the metal roof tearing apart and the glass breaking. My fear was that the house would collapse.
My thinking as I ran across my living room toward the front of the house was, how long will it take for the water to get up to my nose and my throat to leave the ground?
Randall and Ruth make it to their front door. They find it wedged shut by 2 feet of mud, rock, and debris. With no way out, all 6 members of the Lillard family retreat upstairs.
I can just remember thinking, getting as far away from the water as we could with the children.
As they run into a bedroom, the landslide knocks their house off its foundation and carries it 35 feet downstream.
We were all in shock. Everything on the place had just been destroyed in less than 5 minutes.
6 miles southwest of the Lillard farm, in the rustic town of Madison, Jim and Connie Crossgrove are trying to protect their home from the encroaching water. They share this 1-story cottage with their 2 dogs and 2 cats.
I started sandbagging the house because we had maybe a foot of water at that point crossing our driveway.
I was just working on sweeping the patio, keeping the water away from the house.
At 11:30 a.m., Jim takes a break from filling sandbags. He looks up at the mountain and witnesses a debris slide breaking loose.
I literally saw the ground left. Behind it was a wall of water about 25 feet high, carried boulders, rocks, trees, coming directly at our house.
As it thunders toward them, Jim screams for his wife to get inside.
I hear Jim yell, and he's pointing up, and I see trees just snapping and boulders coming down and water.
The couple rushes into their house. Connie begins shutting windows as the wall of water barrels closer to their property. When she runs into the bathroom, the full run of the mudslide crashes into the back of the house and rushes through a window. In seconds, the room's filled with mud and water.
It just literally closed the door behind me and pushed me into the bathroom.
The sludge flows under the door at a furious pace. It quickly climbs to 7 feet, and the bathroom ceiling is 9 feet high. Connie has to stand on the toilet seat to keep her head above the muck.
It got to the point where the water and the mud was above the window, and I was looking at the ceiling trying to figure out if I could get my feet up and break the ceiling to get up into the attic.
As she looks for an escape, a disturbing thought crosses her mind. She knows that her German Shepherd Claudia usually hides in the shower when frightened.
I thought of Claudia in the shower, and I just had this really calm moment in amongst all of this that she was already gone. And for me, it was almost a relief.
15 minutes later, the water level drops 2 feet and uncovers the window. Connie breaks it and begins to crawl out. She grabs onto a tree limb and uses it to hoist herself onto the roof.
I kept wondering in the back of my head, where is Jim? If this is happening to me here, what's happening to him?
With the water damming up in the bathroom, the front of the house is not as flooded. Jim wades through the mud and debris, frantically searching for Connie. As he screams his wife's name, another wave of water suddenly crashes through the house. It slams into Jim, knocking into a sliding glass door.
I hit it dead square in the middle. I popped the whole frame and everything out.
Jim flies out onto the deck. Uninjured but shaken, he is determined to find Connie. He makes his way back inside the house. Now the water is so deep that Jim has to stand on furniture to maneuver through the rooms.
I'm holding on the ceiling fan for stability, just looking for things to grab onto. And suddenly I have a creek or a river running through my house that wasn't there before.
As Jim closes in on the bathroom, hears Connie call his name from the roof.
When I heard her voice, everything went away, but she was alive, and I went through a window and climbed up trees and got up on the roof.
He was just black with silt, and I just was, it just makes me, it was such an incredible moment.
Their relief is short-lived. Another landslide could hit at any moment, and the rain is pounding so hard, it's painful.
It was coming down as hard as I've ever felt in my entire life. Imagine having somebody constantly pour buckets of water over your head.
By 12:30 p.m., Jim and Connie decide to abandon their rooftop. They climb down to a drier area that had been missed by the debris slide. To escape the ongoing flood, the couple decides to hike up to higher ground to another home on their property. Before setting off, they gather a few belongings, including a shower curtain for protection from the rain. Jim discovers one of the couple's 4 pets cowering in the corner.
I found one of the cats. I had no idea even which cat it was. She was so covered in soap.
Connie realizes it's their tabby Jade. She's injured but alive. Connie wraps her in a blanket and they begin their half-mile journey up the mountain.
It was like walking on sponges. We usually use this terra firma out here, just very solid as a rock and stable, and it was anything but.
At the Lillard home, it's been an hour and a half since a landslide ripped through their property. Randall and Ruth are still trying to calm their grandchildren.
The kids knew it was serious. They didn't understand what was going on.
That video brings back lots of memories, and it sends sugars up your spine of what was going on in our nice, calm Madison County and the danger that people were in. So at this point, we're going to talk a little bit about how the county reacted to it. First is Steve Utz, who was our county administrator at the time.
Good afternoon. Basically, we didn't know anything was going on in the county, and I happen to be a fireman also. The tones went off and said you have a house at Ruth that's subject to flooding. We all looked at each other and saw stress. We're at the town of Madison. Ruth is 4 miles from there, and it's not even raining in Madison. So we couldn't figure out what was going on. So we got up to the top of the hill by the Yale residence, looked down the bottom of the hill. The water's probably 10 to 15 feet over top of the road, going around White Oak. And that house, the whole front is under that water, but the backside is on a hill, so they could get up that way so they weren't stranded. And then we found out that White Oak was rising also. So we couldn't stay there, we're gonna get stranded. So we said we had to back up because the house, but we couldn't get into it. And then we got back to the firehouse and we started getting reports from VDOT about roads being closed. State police started giving reports. And the sheriff's office, back then there were no cell phones. All you had, a lot of people had CD radios and they used those. And David Jones, the chairman, talked to me and I said, David, I think we got a problem, but we don't know to what extent. So he told me to get a hold of John Frey, who's the Director of Emergency Services, and contact Richmond. So John called Richmond and told him we had flooding going on, but we didn't know the extent or the amount of damage, but we knew the roads were being closed. And we knew things were getting serious when VDOT had to shut down Route 29. Now, when you shut down a major primary, Richmond has to notify all the state agencies. That started things moving about assistance. The state police and the sheriff's office at VDOT gave us reports on what they found with their patrol officers and where they could go. And John Frey was talking to all the different ones on a daily basis. And unfortunately, he got to know them all on a first-name basis because he was talking to them 2 or 3 times a day. And then David talked to the other board members, and they got their act together, what they were going to do, and he'll report on that. And then the state police furnished their helicopter to do a survey. Gene Metz was a trooper assigned to Madison County, and Gene had a VH recorder, and he did a recording of the areas. And we got to see that, and we could see what was going on. We had no idea of the amount of damage. We didn't know anything about landslides, and looking to see it was major damage everywhere. Topography had been changed, roads were gone everywhere. So we had to say, well, we got to take some type of action. We got the Coast Guard come in with their helicopter, and they would bring in people to help and assist with people getting out of the areas. And then with them working, we also got search and rescue going together. We set up teams to drop into different areas. And the teams were made up of various people. First was EMS personnel to understand in case somebody's injured they run across. Second would be fire personnel to determine if there was a hazard there for people to be concerned. And then we had someone who knew the area with them there. And last, law enforcement. And the reason we had law enforcement is we weren't sure who belonged in what house were people looting because they knew people were gone out of their homes or damage was done. So you had law enforcement there in case there was a law enforcement issue. And then with the helicopters, we had to set up an airport. And we set that up at the high school out here at the driving range, and Wayne Jones was in charge of the airport. Then the Coast Guard helicopter had an issue with his back rotor, and he had to be taken out of the service, and the National Guard took over. They brought in 2 Hueys, and they were bringing search teams out to people and bringing people back to the town they wanted to vacate out. And then, so what happened then, we found out that the water had taken the water plant out of service. That means they couldn't make water. All the poles were going, no electricity, and the intakes were in trouble. So RSA had to get a moratorium and ask people, please don't use any extra water. Be conservative. And they were out of capacity to make water for 4 days, and luckily the tank on Courthouse Mountain didn't run out of water, so they did have water. So we lucked out on that issue. And then with the people evacuating, we weren't prepared for them to bring their pets. So we had to do scratch the head, we had animal patrol and animal shelter to make provisions for people bringing their pets. And first priority was getting the roads repaired because we wanted emergency service to be able to get to people. And without the roads there, they couldn't restore power, and then people couldn't come and go and get out if they needed to go get something. So we were trying to get that done as soon as possible. And I guess one of the good things we found out about it was a lot of people who were living close together knew that they were going to lose everything in their freezers. So they said, we had cookouts. They had cookouts, and the neighbors got together and all ate up all the food so it didn't spoil. So that's one of the things of neighbors helping neighbors. So that's where we started.
Okay. And David, David Jones was chair of the Board of Supervisors at that time.
Good evening, afternoon. I'll start with some people that stick in my mind that I'll name this afternoon, but there's tons of people that worked on this flood disaster that if I had to name all of them, I'd be talking till tomorrow, but I don't think you'll hear me do that. It was interesting. I was a dairy farmer at that time. We were still milking probably 250 cows. And as a farmer, you always want to know what the weather was. And I had a weather radio that had an alarm crystal on it. And about between 4 and 5 o'clock in the morning, it went off talking about flooding in southern Madison County, which a lot of people have forgotten. The bridge at Twyman's Mill got washed out that morning. This is before everything broke loose up in the upper end of the county. So we were trying to get everything done. We had high water, water gates out, and we pretty well got squared away that morning and went back up to my home. And my wife said, "We got water in the basement." And I went down and we had 2 foot of water in our basement. About that time, Steve Utz called and he said, "We've got real problems." I said, "Tell me about it. I got 2 foot of water in my basement." He said, "No, we got real problems." So I had to get to Madison, and I'm lucky I'm still living because my wife probably could have killed me for leaving her with 2 foot of water in the basement. And when we got to Madison, they were talking about the fire company almost got caught up at Ruth. They had the head of the state police was there, and he said, "I brought 200 body bags with me," which was the first indication that we were in serious problems. He had just come across the bridge at the Rapidan at Laneway Farm, where the water plant's at in Green. And I had sent a young state trooper back to keep an eye on the bridge, and he could radio back that the water was over the bridge and rising. And he sent another state trooper and said, "It's not possible. I just went over and it wasn't anywhere near going over that bridge." So it just shows you the amount of water that was going. And I just think fondly of John Frey, who was our emergency coordinator, making decisions to get things going. And John was the one that coined the phrase. He said it was like a real good high school football team playing the Super Bowl. And that's basically what we dealt with. We had a bunch of really good local people, the fire and rescue, the police, and just ordinary citizens that made this thing work as well as it did. And there was another individual that was living in Madison that worked for the Emergency Services for Virginia named Kurt Nellis. And Kurt did us a world of favors because he had a background in that and helped guide us. In the day that we had the national press in on a news conference, he said, "You got one good chance to get some help for this county from outside donations. Take advantage of it." So we put out the appeal for help to people to recover from this flood. And it was amazing how generous people can be that don't know you from Adam from across the country. And that first day was going home, I stopped and bought my first and hopefully last roll of Rolaids. It was something I've never had to deal with before or since, and hopefully never will. But we were very fortunate on that flood. Because I think about the flood in Nelson County and Davis Creek, and I think that's what the state police were thinking about. That if it had been during the night like it was in Nelson, we might have needed those 200 body bags. But fortunately, the people had gotten out and could see what was going on. But set the emergency shelter up. Thank goodness the schools were out. And again, it was new ground for everybody. And then I remember talking to a couple of people from FEMA that were ex-USDA. And he said, just don't think because you were hurt that you're going to get help. You've got to holler and scream and kick and to get the kind of help that you need to get. And it was little things like that, because like I said, we've never, you know, people talk about the floods in the mid-40s and some later floods, but nothing like what we were dealing with here. Of course, the county declared a state of emergency, start getting things in. And communication, Steve said, this was, if you had a bag phone, you were on the cutting edge. People probably don't even know what a bag phone is anymore. But I know we tried to get hold to the radio station in Orange to make some announcements. It would take between an hour and a half per phone call to get it through. So it was trying, to say the least. But as we went along and things started to calm down, we still had a long road to hoe. The emergency committee was set up to try to help people. And on that Sunday, things had calmed down enough that I took off to go to church. We went to Good Hope then. And the sun had finally come out and the clouds had lifted. And I don't know if all y'all know where Good Hope Church is at, but it sits up on a hill and you can have a beautiful view of the mountains. And that was the first time the debris flows became evident, how many they were and how big they were. It looked like a giant cat had just took his claws and just scraped down the side of the mountain. Because before then, the cloud cover was so low, you just couldn't see it. And then Steve and I got to ride on a helicopter ride there toward the end of the week, looking at the damage up there. I didn't think Graves Mill would ever be put back, but it's amazing. If you didn't know better, you'd never know what happened today. And how green everything was. And we had people brought in from the state to actually go to the homes along the river back then. And we were trying to make sure everybody was in good shape, but it's just hard to believe it's been 30 years. We only lost one fatality. And again, I'm glad they didn't need those 200 body bags, but there's just a tremendous number of people here that worked very hard to make this happen. And it just shows that if you've got good people working together, even if you're a high school football team, you can play in the Super Bowl.
I was director of the social services department at that time, and we had learned maybe a year earlier that when there is a disaster and if a shelter has to be opened, it's the Department of Social Services' responsibility. And we had gone to one training session, so we had a little bit of an idea of what to do. And we had a book that had some suggestions, but when John Frey called and said, we're opening shelter, I'm like, okay. So the plan had been that it would be held down at the rescue squad building, so we began to gather up things that we think we might need, like pencils, paper, some telephone books, different things that you might want to set up an office for, and get down at the rescue squad building. And it doesn't take too long to realize this is a big deal, and the rescue squad building is going to be needed for emergency coordination, like a central or a control center for everything. So it's like, okay, where will people go? And we met, the school was very generous. Alan McLaren was assistant principal and Larry Carter, the principal, met us out here, showed us all the different buildings, how to work the kitchen, where the office and all, and gave us a master key to the building. So I was like, oh my, I am in charge here, and I got the key. But we set up a table out in the lobby to get people to register as they came in to get their name. We took over Miss Mallory, Betty Mallory was secretary, we took over her office. People started calling because they could find that telephone number and tell us and say, I'm looking for so-and-so, where can I go, what can I do? And then it was like, okay, operating a shelter, you have to take care of place for them to sleep and the bedding. You have to feed them. You have to be responsible for medical people who were coming, usually didn't have their medicines with them. We worked with the health department and Madison Drug Company to get medicines for people to last for a day or two. And so we had volunteers that came. Volunteers in Madison are great. People just show up and say, what can I do? Ken and Graves started a coffee pot going. And then Randy Powell and I, it's getting into be in the afternoon, and we have people staying in the shelter, and it's like, they gotta eat. And Oliver and his wife came up and said, is there something we can do? And Randy and I said, cook dinner. And they fixed a chicken dinner, barbecue chicken dinner for 100 people that night, and they had it ready. So that part was real good, and we're thinking about this is going along. John Brady, you'll hear his name 100 times, he was very thrifty in his duties as emergency management. And the cots that we had for the people that needed a place to sleep were surplus from the Korean War. They were this ugly dark canvas with these hard wooden things to try to, I see T over there, you couldn't get them to go together easily. But
You've got so many fires.
oh, you still have them? I thought we got rid of them. Well, I'm so sorry. One of the first things after the flood was over, I said, if social services can find some money, we are buying new cots. And we bought new cots, so we didn't think we'd ever have to deal with them again. But volunteers from the fire department, rescue squad, everybody came and they bought all those cots, and the gymnasium became our bedding. Well, then you have to think about privacy, and you have to think about people's mental health. People, you can see that was a hard situation. That was nerve-wracking. And did people need a space to be by themselves, or did they need some counselors or somebody to talk to? So we set up a little city out here at the high school, and it worked pretty good. We had to figure out how to keep up with who came in, because people were calling and saying, have you seen so-and-so? And we're like, no. And nobody had phones. Those that have to go somewhere to use a phone to call and ask. So we started tracking the people. As soon as we heard anything, we'd go, well, at 4 o'clock they were at so-and-so. And that was about the best that we could do. But we also learned and remembered we were working with the government and bureaucracy, that we kept records and we documented everything we could do. I see Gay Goodall sitting out here, and we divided our social services team into teams, and Gay was in the kitchen, and she said, what should I do? And I said, make sandwiches, fix lunch. And she's like, okay. So we went to the store and got bread. We opened up charge accounts. We got cheese. You know, people were so generous and cooperative that it was amazing. People started bringing in donations. There were some money donations, which we needed and used. We needed clothes. You don't like going around with wet underclothes. It's a little uncomfortable. And diapers for babies and baby formula, things that you don't think that you're going to need. And so we stockpiled all of those. The hallway began to get filled with cleaning supplies, mops and brooms and Clorox. I think Clorox was on everybody's list for everything. And the goal of a shelter is, when you open a shelter, the goal is to close the shelter. So we ran the shelter for about a week. And then when it was realized how much devastation had occurred, it was declared a national disaster. And that's when we left, and the American Red Cross came in and FEMA, and they took over everything. Somebody else that I wanted to mention, that was Jim Moore, who used to work for the telephone company, and we had this telephone system for the school, and we needed a lot more. And he was thinking, he wasn't sure how he could do. He went home, and early the next morning, he's like, I got it figured out, and he did. And we all lived happily ever after. It was a big deal for us. For me personally, I come to work and left my 11-year-old daughter and 14-year-old daughter and the 11-year-old nephew at home, and they called to say, water's coming in the basement, and they could stand at the top of the steps, and you could hear the water running through the basement. It's an old English basement. Then the telephone went out, then the electricity went out, and we were here in town. Dennis tried to get home and couldn't at that point. And that afternoon we heard that Bobby Johannes was going to try to get to Etlin. There were no roads to Syria and Etlin at that time, but that one little old one-lane wooden bridge on Duet had survived. And they passed it, they went over it. I got my sister-in-law to said, will you go with them and drop her off at my house and take care of people? So it was a little stressful, but everybody was so cooperative that it worked out okay. Camp Varsity was a kids' camp up in Ayler, and there were mudslides and landslides, and would they need to be evacuated or not? And so after a lot of thought, yes, they needed to be evacuated. A school bus went up. They got out to Oak Grove Church and brought them to town. And the director at that time was not wanting to evacuate his camp, and George Allen was the governor, and it just happened that as the school bus with kids came, the governor came, and everybody thought it was just a political ploy, and I mean, people were angry. So our staff was calling parents mostly from Northern Virginia to say, Camp Varsity is closing, come pick up your kids at the high school. And then in about half an hour, we called them and said, the camp is reopening, your children are fine, you can leave them there, or you can try to get them back home. So we had to do a lot of things on the fly and make adjustments. And at the same time too, there was this little program called Welfare Reform that was supposed to take place July 1st, and our planning district was the first one to implement it. And they were still writing the rules for it, and this was June 27th, to be effective July 1st. But that kind of had to take a back seat to us. But Kurt Nellis, who they're talking about, was on the phone, and he says, hey, can you use prisoners to come do search and rescue and repairs and all that? And I'm thinking of all the liability, where would they stay, how would we feed them? And I said, no, we can't do it. And he says, George, we can't do it. And I'm like, I have just told the governor of Virginia no. But it was a different George, so I was okay there. I was just really proud of all the social services staff and all the people who just jumped in, and we kept our social services office going while we were out here. And it was just typical of Madison County that we take care of things and we get them done. So then Mike Hale was on the flood relief committee. He's going to talk about how we did.
Good afternoon. Thank you all for coming out. Like Nan said, I'm going to talk a little about the 1995 Flood Relief Committee. As Nan just stated a little while ago, monetary donations started coming in almost immediately, probably before the rain stopped. There were envelopes placed in the front office of the Social Service Department, and also here at the school front desk, I believe, for donations to be made to Salvation Army, Red Cross, and the county/social services. Two businessmen in Culpeper, Joe Daniel at Culpeper Wood Preservers and Swift Bank, made challenges of $10,000 each for people to match. And also, the Red Cross was accepting funds for the Madison County flood, and also the Piedmont United Way. Apparently there was a little, somewhat maybe a conflict there. Anyway, those funds that have been made to the Red Cross and Piedmont United Way to be used for the Madison County flood relief, those funds had to be negotiated. And finally, after some negotiations, that money was released to the Madison County Flood Relief Committee. And that money, along with the challenges from the two businesses, $120,000 was transferred to the Madison County Flood Relief Committee. At this time, the Board of Supervisors decided it was time to establish a committee to handle these funds and to use them appropriately. And the Board of Supervisors appointed Glenn Marino as chairman, and also appointed Hot Tinsley, Nan, and myself to authorize payment from this account. And we opened accounts at both banks in the town at that time. And other committee members on this committee were representatives from Mesa, representatives from Rapidan Better Housing, representatives from churches, volunteers, and representatives from Virginia Cooperative Extension, and many, many more. goal of this committee was to get a handle on what was needed and how to get it to the people that were needing it as quickly as possible with little or no red tape. So a one-page, very simple application was formed, and it was bulk mailed to the citizens of Madison County where they could use and fill out. And mainly all they had to do was put the name and address and a brief reasoning for what they needed the funds for, and some of them gave an estimated cost and others didn't. And the Department of Social Service office was used for mailings and for receiving mail and also for this committee's meetings. And the flood committee met once a week, and when mailing was real heavy, they met sometimes more than once a week. The applications that were received were assigned to the volunteers, and those volunteers would assess those needs and coordinate how we might best help them. And I want to comment that I think this committee did an honest and as fair as they could be with what monies they had and how to use them, and has helped as many people as possible. And after they assessed these applications, they would turn them over to Hot and Nan and myself for approval and for issuing payment. Types of things that we helped with this relief fund was repairing of driveways, car repairs, fencing materials, cleaning land, wells, damaged wells, repairing those, appliances, replacing lost food, and supplying cleaning essentials. Payment was oftentimes issued to individuals, but most of the time it was issued to the vendors that provided these services, the Madison Wood and Electric Company and folks like that. Madison County was the primary source of where we used these funds, but we did use a few in King County and the Middle River, Kinderhook, Fletcher area, and a few down in the Rapidan area. Over $240,000 was collected and distributed. And this committee continued to meet as long as applications were coming in, and they met almost until the end of 1995. There was a little bit of money left in there at the end, and with hurricane season coming the following year and possibilities of hurricane, the little money that was left in these accounts was used to buy or purchase hurricane supplies. And then after this, these two accounts were closed. If there was anything might good come out of some disastrous thing as this flood in Madison, the Salvation Army unit as we know it today was born. Before the flood, I don't know how many of you knew, we did have a Salvation Army service unit in Madison County. When you would get bills, more or less, we call them bills, but requests for money from the National Salvation Army in D.C., and a Madison native sent them money. Madison would receive back from National Headquarters a very, very small portion of that donation. And it was put in a bank by a banker in Madison, and it was a fund there. And we also had a local attorney in the town, and if somebody came through and needed gasoline or bus ticket home or something like that, this is when these funds were used. I didn't know we had a Salvation Army service unit at that time. But anyway, the Salvation Army had a canteen here, or maybe two, that were feeding during the flood, and two employees of social services at the time started talking to the commander who was in charge of this area and who was here with the canteens, and asked if Madison County could get bells, ring the bell. And he said, sure, he could fix us up with stands and bells and kettles. And one of the employees asked the other one, she said, do you think we can get bell rings? And the Another employee said, yes, I'd be glad to ring the bell. So, I'm not sure it started in the bell ringing season of 1995 or 1996, but we got bells and kettles and stands, and the Salvation Army has rung the bell in Madison every year since then. And like Nan so eloquently spoke in the article that she wrote about the flood that was published in the Madison County Historical Society newsletter, the response of the people of Madison County, it was just so overwhelming during the flood that it makes Nan and myself, and I'm sure most of you all, proud to be a Madisonian. And I hope Madison will always be that way. Neighbor, happy neighbor. Thank you.
All right, Steve, you want to go now, or we have some selected speakers that are going to tell their story. Do you want to go now, or you want to go after them?
I am Steve Hoffman, and I am a member of the Madison County Volunteer Fire. I have been, if I make it to next month, 65 years now. I am a senior member of the Madison County Rescue Squad, and thanks to David Jones and Steve Utz, I got appointed to Emergency Management Coordinator after Johnny Frey retired. I wanted to kind of let you know how the system will work. You know what all these people have talked about, and you know what they were doing. What were the rest of us doing? Who were the people that were actually out there with their feet on the ground? I want to go a little bit. I don't think I can entertain you, but maybe I can be somewhat factual, and maybe you'll go home with the knowledge that we have plans in place. We have adequate people to come in when the phone rings to react to emergencies. I want to explain to you first how the new EMS plan took place. After I took office, I got to looking around about what we had in place as far as plans, and I realized that we had some, but they were just not up to snuff. I became aware that the governor had made a $60,000 grant available for counties to upgrade their emergency action plan. So Steve Utz and Robbie Finks, Radolph Finks were the only two people I knew that knew how to really work a computer. I'd seen them, but I still don't know how to work them. So we sent out, and we knew that if we had to be done on computer, and I knew that we didn't plug in something in each one of those blocks, it was going to be thrown in the trash by the state. That's just the way it works. So sometimes we put stuff in the on the action plan that I wasn't really sure was entirely truthful. I was almost positive it was not factual. After we did it, we got accepted, and we put it RFPs, and a company in Richmond picked it up, and they developed the plan. That plan before then was this thick. Our plan now is that thick. To give you an idea about how thorough they are, the emergency operations plan has, under the Richmond guys, has room for 50 people. We don't have 50 people. So we look it over, and we whittle it down to 5 or 6 to make this thing manageable, to make a spot for these people in the county who have had backgrounds with emergency management. And state code also says that has to be upgraded every 5 years. Now, the way things get kicked off in Madison is to have an emergency declared. And they're kind of, I put those in 3 categories. There's a little bitty, teeny tiny emergency, and then there's a county emergency, and then there's a state that may grow into a federal emergency. And what are some of the small ones? Late in the afternoon, you got sleet, you got rain, and the roads are slick as they can be. We can, I say we, the sheriff, rescue squad, and officer in the fire company, we decided let's declare a closed short emergency. And what that actually does, it does not require us to go to the board of supervisors to get county approval. It's just that by 10 o'clock in the morning, the sun comes out, the highway department's going to do their thing, and the roads are going to be better. So what that actually entails is it's more beneficial for the rescue squad than anything, because when we declare this, a little emergency, our firemen are gonna start coming to the fires, because they already know how slick these roads are. So that's a little small emergency, about 9 o'clock the next morning, sun's out, everything goes away. Whatever we put in place, we also disband. We do not leave it out there hanging. The only difference is that the rescue squad, when this little emergency is declared, will take you to the nearest hospital. They will take you to the nearest hospital. When you tell me, well, my doctor's in Charlottesville, I've got to go to Charlottesville. Well, your doctor's probably in the Florida Keys playing golf. He'll be back in 2 weeks if you want to wait. So, we have what falls in the small category, a wind, tornado. Did you know we're in an earthquake zone? We are. We have had small tornadoes. And the duration of that is like 1 to 6 days. And the duration of the smaller one is like the next day. So the next is a state declaration. That is what we all been discussing. We have a county declaration, and we decided a county declaration. We contact the Board of Supervisors. David Jones gets in touch with at least 3 of his fellow members. Hopefully he can get in touch with all of them, and the county will decide whether or not it is a local emergency. And once that local emergency is in place, what that actually does is puts Steve Utz at the time was County Administrator, puts them on notice, we're all the county taxpayer dime right now. Anything we do hereafter, the county is responsible for paying for. Their whole staff may come in, their staff may come in, the officers in charge of the money, which category different things come in, and all that's handled by the county. Steve Utz is administrator. He's in his office answering phone calls. He's doing local county business, and David Jones is wandering around. He'll come to the emergency operations center, look at it, he'll be gone for a while. Anyway, David shows up. Now, state declarations can be mainly flood. It can be fire. If the flood or whatever is significant enough, it may grow from a state disaster into a federal disaster. What that does, that causes FEMA to come in. Now everybody says when FEMA's coming in, they're going to drive in with a tractor trailer load of cash, and they're going to up the back door and they're going to shovel it out. Well, everybody that's ever dealt with FEMA knows that ain't apt to happen. Now they will do after action plans, they will do mitigation plans. The flood here in Madison, the FEMA only mitigated 3 properties. So they did not fork out the cash. But they do have no-cost loans and different things that the federal government can offer that the state doesn't necessarily do, and the county certainly cannot afford to do. Once these disasters are asked for and approved by the board or approved by the governor, we go to a unified command. That is, everybody comes to one spot. And when you open that door to that unified command, you'll see the sheriff sitting over here on this end of the table. What's he doing? What's his job? He's handling local law enforcement stuff, and he's got deputies that are out in the field that are noticing things that are fixing to pop, things that are fixed to happen. They're our first line of defense. He handles local law enforcement. Sitting behind him would be a state trooper, probably a shift supervisor, sergeant, maybe lieutenant. I have seen a captain. What he's going to do is, when these roads are flushed out in 29, Rapidan, Robinson, he's down somewhere, sending them across on 66 to 81 and then back to Charlottesville. He's handling traffic and things that are outside of the sheriff's jurisdiction. So, fire company and EMS, chances are the fire chief will be in that command center. He'll be shifting in and out with things. But all these people in this command center, they're not only thinking what's happening, what's popping right in front of them, they're also thinking about shift changes. They're thinking about radio communication. What's the most important thing in an emergency? Communication. Communication. And that $5.5 or $6 million they spent on upgrading the radio system in Madison County, if you're complaining about that, that's one thing, but if you're upside down in a car where you have no radio communication, you can be doggone glad that we spent that money. We had, Steve, 80% coverage on the old system, we got 97% coverage on the new system. Communication is everything. So
Steve, not to interrupt you, but we have some people that, we've been here an hour, so can I cut yours short for a minute and let some other people talk?
I knew that was gonna happen.
I said keep it under 5 minutes.
I can do that. But just to let you know, as I look around in this audience, after action report, I want to mention a couple of people. After all this is over, you immediately start thinking about what you should have done, what you could have done better. We all sit around and we talk about, maybe things that we could have done better. The county building inspector, after action report goes over, he looks at the damage of all the houses and stuff. Brad Jobs, raise your hand, Brad, so people can see you. Brad took care of all the agricultural damage and did all the assessment of that under his office. I see retired state troopers that helped. I see 2 people here that work for the highway department. You cannot imagine how much help in these types of situations at the highway department, at the power company. If you ever sit in the dark for 4 or 5 days, you know how important the power company is. So I want you to know that Madison, for a small place, it was once described to me by the people that run this in Richmond, that for a small county like Madison County, was well represented, and the people who did the work here were well respected throughout the state of Virginia. Thank you for your attendance, and thank you for your time.
Okay, thank you, Steve. Thank all of you. Jill Miller and Carol Gamble have an interesting story about what happened to them on the day of the flood.
Oh, yes. Keep in mind, I didn't even want to come. Okay.
She talks too much and would take too long, so I'll try to be as brief as possible. For anybody that doesn't know, I'm Jill Miller.
I'm Carol Gamble.
And we have the country card.
Use the mic.
Louder. Louder. Is it working? I don't think it's working. Is it? No. Like this?
Yeah.
Okay, we had an experience. We were at Gray's Mountain Lodge the morning of the flood. About 9 o'clock, we were leaving Grays's, coming toward Criglersville, and the water started coming across the road. So right before we got to Banco, at the bridge there, the fire department, Jack Frey, said, you really need to turn around. You can't come through here, it's starting to flood. So he's told us to go back up and go across Poorhouse Road at Criglersville. Well, right before we got there, we were in front of the McHaney's house up on the hill. And the water came across and stalled out our truck. And there we sat. We were there for a purpose. The good Lord was watching over the Rossers because a young man had Nancy Rosser and her mother-in-law and a pickup truck. And they were coming toward us. We were stalled. And their truck went around us and somehow got turned around and got hung up right alongside the back of our garbage truck. So we were protecting them from all the floodwaters because it was hitting our truck and going around them. We were in our truck for almost 5 hours, and luckily, just as the water started to come into our cab, the Coast Guard came down. They were there, and they had a man come down, and he went over first and rescued the older women, because we were young then. Younger. And so he attached himself to them and took them over the dry land up onto the McHaney's property. we were hoping they could come because they were a big help, but they're away on vacation, so. They got rescued up there onto dry land, and then they came and got each of us. And he was really a cute young guy, too. Came down, and of course we had to get attached to him. We're not going into the details of that, but I can say that when he got me over to dry land, we lost our footing. And I did have to say to him, "It's a shame you're such a rush, you gotta go get my point." Anyway, and they went and rescued her, and then we got taken to McCaney's. They took us in, they warmed us up, they fed us, and finally, I guess it was about 7 o'clock that night, we had to wade out to the Banco store to get, luckily there were people at the Banco store that were giving rides to people. And they actually got us home, and I walked in the house 9 o'clock that night and just started crying. It was like, we made it. But anyway, Carol's going to tell you about what the McCaneys did like a month later.
Yes, so, about a month later, the McCaneys called the Coast Guard and recommended if they could, or asked if they could send the pilots that were involved in this rescue. Because they had expressed to us, as soon as we got rescued, they said, you know, this was like one of the most dangerous rescues we've ever done.
Yeah, they don't.
And let me tell you, the only time I was scared was when the helicopter was directly above the garbage truck, and the propellers are going around, and the branches are flying. I thought, we're not going to drown, we're going to blow up. So, but anyway, so they rescued us.
What are we talking about?
So we go to the party, and the McCaneys invited them, and they came, and we were so excited but we didn't know the rescue people were there. And this guy, who Jill did mention casually that she thought was kind of cute. She didn't tell you about the part when they rescued her. She went up and over to dry land.
I told them that.
And she lost her balance and pulled this guy right down on top of her. And she said, boy, is he cute. Then he came back to rescue me. So I'm like, yeah, this guy really is cute. So anyway, so he said to me, are you ready? And I said, yeah. He said, you two aren't scared? And I said, no, you're gonna, I saw her, I can do this. So he hooks me up, and we get out on the running board of the garbage truck, which was almost paid for 2 months later. It would have been paid, but now it's gone. So he lifts me up, and we go up in the air, and it was like,
You were supposed to be talking
it was very easy, and he brings me to the other side, and I get down, and I land, and I said, I'm like a ballerina, because Jill fell, I didn't.
What she was supposed to be talking about was, about a month after we got rescued, the McCaneys had an after-flood party and invited us and the Rossers, and they had the young guy there that had rescued us, had him upstairs and said, we have a surprise for you ladies, we'd like you to meet somebody, and brought him down so we could actually talk to him and socialize with him. And they had made a cake, and they had a picture of our garbage truck, and then a little pickup truck, and yeah, so it was crazy.
Yes.
But we made it, and yeah, so that's about it.
Thank you for all of us. Khalil Hassan.
He's over here, he won't say anything. He's being shot.
Bad idea, giving me a microphone and a Catholic audience. My name is Khalil Hassan. My wife and I moved to Triggersville in 1992. So we didn't have a very large social network.
Closer.
Oh, okay. So So we didn't have a very large social network. We began to meet a lot of folks after the flood actually did. One thing I do want to say is that we're eternally grateful for the outreach from the county and the citizens who helped us out during that period of time. On that fateful morning, my routine was to get up, have a cup of coffee, feed the cats, and then go. Our house was under construction, so we were renting a farmhouse not far from where our house was. And that morning, I was sitting out on the front porch. The front porch is higher than the back. The back side of the house is actually at ground level. So I'm sitting there, and it's like I said, it's raining cats and dogs. So I'm deciding whether I'm going to stay at the house or go out and do the work. I looked out, and there's a small stream on the side of the house. And one of my neighbors had one of his dogs over there. And I looked out, and my marker was there's a small pine tree next to the house. I said, if water gets up to the to the tree, I'm bailing. So I went in the house and went to call my neighbor to tell him to come and get his dog because it didn't look very well for him to stay there. And the phone was dead. And I said, I'll put the cats in. We had 2 cats. So put the cats inside to be safe. Like I think I heard someone on the video say the same thing. So I put the cats in, went to put on a boot, my shoes, to leave. I was going to leave. And before I could get one other boot on, something hit the house like a truck. And at that moment, I knew something was wrong, really wrong. So I got one boot on, and water started coming in the back side of the house. I said, naturally, if it's flooding, you get to the high ground. So like someone in the video said, I started up the stairs to get to the 2nd floor. Halfway up, I was in between the stairs, but they had collapsed. Got out of the stairs, got up to the top, 2nd floor. I was going to go out the window, get out the window to escape. Couldn't get the window open, or trying to get the window open, so I went to break it. Ended up breaking it anyway, and got out on the front porch, which is now 5 feet lower than what it usually was. I looked over to the side, and the porch was like maybe 3 or 4 feet off the ground, which was normally 10 feet off the ground. Jumped off the roof, started running up the hill. If you never had an adrenaline rush, it would have you doing things that you didn't think you could do. I started running, looked back once, and saw the propane tank was one place, and the house that was connected to was further apart from that. I spent the next probably 7, 8 hours trying to find my way to my neighbor's house, who was north of where we were. Moving up the hill, stuff still coming down, still raining hard. There was one stream that thought about crossing. I said, if I don't make it across, I'm done. So I went further up the mountainside, just on the deer trail. By that time, this is started out at about 10 o'clock in the morning, and now it's about 3 or 4, and it was getting late. And all the time it was still raining, lightning, and I'm in the woods, under trees, and lightning strikes everywhere. My only recourse was to say, well, I'll find a dry place to maybe just build a shelter and stay there. Thing about that, I started putting a lean-to together actually, and I smelled a stink bug. I said, no, I can't do this. So I kind of started moving a little further up the mountain and found a place where I could cross the stream because it had, triple back a bit. Finding my way to my neighbor's house. I finally got up to where he was. I was able to come out of the woods where his house was. And it's kind of funny because he's a retired naval person. And I looked out and his house was still intact. But he was standing on the porch, and everything I could think of with all the debris floating around him, this guy's going to go down with the ship. Because he was just standing there holding it. The only damage to his house, though, was a rock or boulder hit the side of the drain pipe, and that was it. Got there, we kind of discussed what we thought was going on. We had no idea other than it'd been raining and there was stuff coming down from everywhere. Stayed the night there, think I slept, but I'm not sure. Because I could still hear water running, river running beside his house, and it was like, I don't know, I don't think I want to do this. So finally got enough sleep, came back the next morning to survey the property there. We walked down the road, and that piece of Lindsay Lane, which was 642 at the time, was now a canyon. I mean, you could walk up the side and look down maybe 10, 15 feet. The thing about it is that the debris came down and turned right that way our mailbox was, and there was no damage to any of the properties further past that. If you know Clifton Hill, it was on the same road that he lives on, if you're familiar with him. He has a story with Don, he's not here to tell it, so I'll tell it for him, but he and his daughter were in their well house, and Clifton was like 80, maybe 90 years old at the time, and he said, he remember telling me a story about him hearing it and just kind of looking out and then running. If you know Clifton or knew Clifton then, to see Clifton run was a story all by itself. Anyway, like I said, he's an older guy, walked with a cane just to get out of that well house was something to see if you could have seen that. Next day was like, I was surprised because I saw these guys on the road as I came down. I said, we moved from DC area there, and the only time you see an elected officials when it was time to gather your vote. So I was kind of impressed, but I saw, other than Jimmy Hale, who's not here, but was Dave and the two students, Steve, who came up with a survey in the area there. So I thought that was kind of impressive. Just to keep it kind of short here. The next day I was out looking to see what I could recover, because the whole entire house had moved off. It was gone. I went and looked at it, went back to see what the site looked like, and found the two cats. They got out somehow, another was up in a tree. Also, I had a car there, my truck was parked there. It didn't get damaged at all, other than some sand in the radiator there. So actually, they were able to drive it off the site. And our clothesline was still intact. So, yeah, that was sort of cool in a way there. But the other cool thing was that the entire second floor of the house was still intact. It was maybe 200 feet from where it used to be. If it were, it's almost like I could have got into bed and took a nap if I wanted to. That's intact. As I dug through the debris and tried to see what I could recover, I was pulling stuff away, and all of a sudden music came on. I had a boom box that was in there, and what it played was the Beatles, All We Need Is Love. That's the truth. After that, all my trauma kind of left me, and I said, I can make it through this. So in the next couple of days, it was still a trouble time to be. Just trying to recover everything. The clothes on my back is what I had. Thank goodness there was, like you were saying, that there were services put in place to kind of help me along the way. Clifton, who should not have been driving, drove into town with his daughter there, and I stopped at the high school place to pick up some stuff and get back home. And there was a lady, I don't know who she was, gave me a ride back to Cricketsville, and I walked from Cricketsville up 642 back to where I was staying there. And it was a difficult time, and even now, if we get more than 2 or 3 days worth of rain, hackles go up on my back here, and I keep a goat back near the door, just in case, because it says 100-year flood. I think the next year there was something similar to that, so I think that's a myth. I don't believe in any of that stuff anymore. But thank you for the time. Thank you.
Thank you. Lynn was just a lad when this happened 30 years ago.
No worries. Let's close. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Lynn Graves. Our family runs Graves Mountain Lodge. On that day, it was raining, so we were sitting in the shop not doing anything. Mom was at the lodge. We had about 30 people staying with us, and we were sitting in the shop. Next thing you know, water started coming up in the shop. So we were like, this has never happened. So what do? We get out, take our trucks, and we start driving to see how far we can go. Well, we went down almost too quick a run. That was as far as we could go. And then we turned on Weekly Hollow. We couldn't even get to where the trout pond is. So we were on a little island for a while. So we got in touch with Mom. She said they were fine. All the employees that were there, they had to stay. Because usually when the water gets up at the lodge that evening, it will go down. But unfortunately, by the time the water did go down, we did lose part of our bridge at the lodge. So it took us 2 days to put some more pipe in to actually get their guests away from the lodge. We measured a little over 20 inches in Syria, which still a lot, but would actually probably save Syria. Big Meadows only got like 3 inches that day. So if Big Meadows would have got anything 20 inches to 30 inches, Syria would have definitely been gone. So that was probably our saving grace. And then that evening, even though Mom didn't want us to do it, we finally found a way. We made it down to Banco by going out through a few culverts and a couple back roads, and we made it down to Banco. And then we realized with a lot of run washed out, we were going to be there a while. And then we walked back up towards Cribbersville just to see what the road was, because we ended up having to come out through Etlin and back down 231. So, but it was an interesting day that, just like everybody, you'll remember it for your lifetime.
Thank you. Brad Jarvis.
Those of you who don't know who I am, I'm Brad Jarvis. I was the agricultural extension agent in Madison County at the time of the flood, but I recently retired. Isn't that awesome? 37 years in extension. The day started out really normal for me. We were getting ready for the fair. So got up and I went to the fairgrounds, and I was going to do some cleanup and set up, getting ready for the fair. And all of a sudden, a Coast Guard helicopter lands at the high school. And I'm like, something is going on. So I get myself together, I go to the office, and then I hear emergency operations has opened. My duty as the ag extension agent is to do ag damage assessment, put a dollar value on ag damages. When I showed up at the Emergency Operations Center, I realized that my role would probably be expanded. It would not just be agriculture, it would be damages for the entire county. And so I actually moved my office to the Emergency Operations Center with a computer, and I brought Margaret Clatterbuck with me. So, because I was a guy who wrote all of my stuff down, and my administrative assistant typed all of my stuff. And so I would write it, Margaret would type it, and David would read it to the press. So we prepared all of David's documents for press releases. While I was getting that done, all of a sudden I realized that the Route 29 bridge was getting ready to go underwater, and that Laneway Dairy Farm was actually, their milking parlor was getting ready to go underwater. So the Lamb brothers, John and Earl Lamb, we grabbed trailers and we went to Laneway Farm and we evacuated all of Laneway's dairy cattle. All the milking cattle were brought to Cedar Springs Farm, and for the next, 3 to 4 hours, we trained about 100 cows to go through a new milking facility. So we milked all of Laneway's cows at Lamb's farm. Once they got settled in, then I went on to prowl to get resources for farmers. So we had to find feed resources, we had to find water. It's a flood, it doesn't make any sense to find water, but when water is not abundantly available that you can use for drinking or for livestock after a flood, it's all just contaminated. So I find generators and I find all the supplies I can, not to be accumulated anywhere. I just left them in place where they were. And so once I got my resources lined up, I started trying to do what I was supposed to be doing, and that was damage assessment. So I just hopped in my truck and tried to go around like I normally do. I didn't get very far. I could not move around at all because all the roads were pretty much torn up or not accessible. So I had to go back to the Emergency Operations Center. So what I decided to do was I pulled out a topo map. I met with every rescue crews that left. There were 2 guys with the Salvation Army who filled up backpacks, and they just walked out into where the people were. It didn't matter there wasn't a road. They walked out there. The Madison Fire Department volunteers were amazing. I just said, while you're out, just be observant of what you see. Damaged houses, property, livestock out, whatever you see, just make a mental note. And when you come back, just report to me so I can start this report, because I have 24 hours to put my first report in to the state of Virginia. That was our 24-hour initial damage report. So they came back and they started filtering some information to me, so I had something to write my report on. And then that night, it's like the second day actually by now, David Jones comes up to me and he says something that really made me think, wow, this is very important what we're doing here. He says, you make sure we get a presidential declaration or Madison County will be bankrupt. Because we were spending so much money in emergency services, as Mr. Hoffman said, it's on the county's dime until you get a declaration. So now I'm just like going, all right, this brings new meaning to a presidential declaration. If we don't get FEMA help, and we are, we're not going to be able to pay our bills. And so finally I just sat down with a map and using the rescue teams were out trying to get people medicine or get them out of harm's way, were just trickling information to me. I sat down and I finally drove the farms I could get to. Roads were starting to open, and so I took a topo map and I started recording water level lines all along the Rapidan River from 29 all the way back into Somerset area. And so I had an idea of where the water line was going to be, and I did that for I did it for the Robinson, White Oak, I did it for all. And then from those maps, I made a flood zone because we didn't have drones or anything. I had to do this from the ground, so it was very hard to do any estimations of things. But then I figured out that once I had the flood zone, I knew where the cropland was, I knew where the pasture was. I could actually estimate crop losses. I could estimate miles of fence lost. I could estimate houses that were underwater or damaged. And then I used those reports they brought me, and I just assembled this report as accurately as I could because I didn't want to embellish any of these. I wanted them to be real. But it started adding up so fast, the dollar figure was so big that I started having to go back and make sure I was right, because I did not want Madison not to be a presidential declaration. And if you were watching the video, that number that shows up there, that $53 million of ag damage, that's my number. That's the number I calculated for Madison County. So we started putting these together. We were still in rescue phase. I finally could get out the Graves Mill, and I can't give you a timeline because in about a week's time, that kind of felt like 1 or 2 days really in my head because you never stopped. You just kept moving and doing what you needed to do to help. But then I realized the real issue now was with our livestock, we had to actually secure them. No fence remained if they were near water. There was no feed. All the hay bales had just been washed to Fredericksburg by now. And there was no fresh water for anything. And then when I got to the Lillard's house, their hog barn had smacked right into the back of their house. And there were probably 30 to 40 pigs running around just randomly. And then when I went to the back of the house, there were about 30 or 40 pigs just flattened to the back of the house in silt and mud. So then I had to call VDAX in because at that time I needed to bring a team in to handle the mortalities of livestock. What were we going to do with them? So we got in touch with the Virginia Department of Agriculture. They sent a team to me to take care of that situation, which still was hampered by access issues. The road to Gray's Mill was gone. I mean, there was no pavement there anymore. I mean, it was just literally ripped off the earth. So we had to wait till that, but you know, once the sun came out, it got hot. And it was not like it was just a cool summer. You're in June. And so once the rain disappeared, the humidity level was big. It was hot. So I needed to get a team in there as quickly as I could. Also, I had to start building fence because we had livestock kind of wandering around the county. If you lost your fence, you're so focused on taking care of your family and your loved ones, you don't worry about the livestock. You pray that they do what they're going to do, and most of them did. Other than the hog casualties, most livestock just went to higher ground. They got there. We got all the dairy cows out of Laneway, all the non-milking stock there at Laneway. They just went up to the highest ground they could there. So I had all this fence to build, but I did not have a team. Every resource we had in Madison County was being in rescue phase and getting infrastructure back together, feeding emergency crews. We were still looking for families. Nan was still had a board where he went and said, if you've seen this person have them, I mean, it was fascinating how we worked together, by the way. And so I called Farm Bureau, Virginia Farm Bureau. I said, I need teams of people to come in here and help me build fence. And they said, how many teams do you need? I needed 4 or 5, 8 to 10 man teams. And the next day, I had 5 8-man teams. And I went to Madison Wood Preservers and the co-op and got truckloads of barbed wire and T-posts and T-post drivers, and I gave each of those 5 crews 2 pickup loads of fencing supplies. Barbed wire, stakes, fencing clips, and they went in and did the initial confinement of livestock where the fencing was totally gone. And so they would report back to me how they got along. I kept them 3 days, and then they finally got the essential fence together where we could just keep livestock in their place. Also, I was working with the Soil and Water District. The biggest threat right now is if dams were going to give away. You talk about the White Oak Lake. If that dam had gone, we'd have had a worse problem than we had. But if any of you saw White Oak Lake Dam after the event, you could have parked 5 school buses in the ravine. It was cut out of the White Oak Dam. And I don't even know how it did not breach that dam, but it definitely injured that dam. So I worked with Army Corps of Engineers, Culpeper Soil and Water District. We had to rebuild that dam. Next, I went to Middle River. Their pond had breached. It actually gave way. When I got there, the man, and that's another reason why when you build dams, that's why Army Corps of Engineers likes to have some, help you review that, because in an event like that, you got to have an emergency spillway, which was not at Middle River. And the man's house was in its confluence of it busted, and all he did was open his back door and his front door, and the creek ran right smack through his house. I mean, never stops because of the way that pond was situated. The next thing that happened was, as we were trying to recover and we were getting people back on their feet in agriculture, I was making my final estimations. I had not done enough housing estimates yet. I was really focused on ag. Now it was time to go to housing. and I couldn't get to lots of the part of the county. So my father was a retired state policeman, so I had connections to get to the state police helicopter via his knowledge of them. So because since I was not a main emergency guy, I was just kind of a lowly assessor guy. I had to find different ways to get to resources, and I was authorized to get a FEMA team on a National Guard Huey one afternoon. So I loaded up this team from FEMA in a Huey, and finally I had the right guy with FEMA, because they send you like 20 people out of FEMA, and really only one of them has any pull. A lot of them are just volunteers. We got in the helicopter, we got up in the air, we got back into Kinderhook, and I lost track of where I was. I had no idea where I was. When you're on 29 and 230, you get a feel for where you're at. But when you're in the back roads, so I had him land for me. So we landed at the breeding farm, Timmy Breeding's farm. I landed, and here comes Timmy running up there, and I'm like, oh, I know exactly where I am. So once I figured out where I was, we continued our search. When we came back, I had counted 200 houses at that point that had some sort of damage to them. One of the volunteers said she saw 25, and I looked at her supervisor and I said, she must have only looked at 25% of this helicopter, and he said, I agree with you. Thank goodness, because we had a big difference of opinion of what damage was. At least the guy who was in charge agreed with my assessment that there was 200 houses that had damage to them. We submitted all of our reports. Our total damage, ag was 53 million. Total county damage was 93 million. The entire state of Virginia was $200 million. 93 million of that, of the state, was Madison County. Almost half of it was Madison County. So then the recovery, the committee got together to manage the funds. And I was really worried we weren't going to get funds that were going to be used for meaningful projects in Madison County. And that's when that committee got Glenn Marino to do that. That was the best thing we ever did right there, that is what saved us, because Mr. Hale mentioned the two programs I designed for Madison County. The fencing program I designed, and the debris removal program I designed. And I worked with the committee to design how we were going to pay that out, because you wanted to be very fair in how you distributed this money, and you wanted the people who deserved getting that money to get that money. So after a lot of time, effort, and thought, and homework, we designed a fencing program where we just allocated you a dollar amount, and it was a voucher system I designed. You weren't just given a dollar amount and you could go buy your supplies anywhere. You got a voucher to buy supplies at MWP, because we wanted to make sure you used that money to buy fencing supplies, not to take a mini vacation. Same thing with the debris removal. Actually, we piggybacked with the Department of Transportation. They were the king of debris removal at that point in time, because they were getting roads open. So we used a lot of the excavation companies that they were using to do some debris removal. Just open up driveways on farms, get milk trucks in, get feed in. We had to restore some normal operations on these farms. So that was not just a program that took, we were pretty much out of our rescue phase. We were purely in recovery phase. Everybody had left the emergency services center. No one's in the shelter. It's just me and that committee that's handling some money. This is a year later. I spent 2 years of my career working on the flood, starting with the initial damage assessment, and worked on that for 2 more years till we completed a fencing program. We finished the debris removal, and now I had farms that were just full of unfertile soil, 12 to 24 inches. So I was bringing soil specialists from areas so we could get this land back in production. The biggest industry in Madison County is its agriculture, so we had to get it back financially operating correctly. And our prime farmland was pretty much not very prime anymore at that point because it had a lot of mountain soil sitting on top of it. So we spent a lot of time working with farmers to get it back together. And as people have already said, that if you went there today, you would not even notice it. I do notice it because when you see a giant rock just sitting in the middle of our field randomly, it was sat there in 1995. And no one could actually move it anymore because Mother Nature put it there, and you certainly are not going to get it out of there. And so the stars are about gone. You can, if you know where to look, you can probably see a little part in the trees these days. But when I see a rock on a farm, I just think of that day because that rock just landed there. And Gray's Mill was something to behold after that. It looked like it was a war zone there. It was nothing there. I mean, it just ripped it to pieces. So, God bless those people who went through that. I worried about a lot of those people. It's, no one's mentioned this, but it is real. When you can watch this on TV all you want, but when you walk up to a house that has lost everything, emotionally, it works on you. And so you had to deal with a lot of that, not just people who were in it, but those who were providing the services. We were impacted emotionally by that as well. And so that's all I have, and I just am grateful for the team that we had that made that, really made that as successful as it could be with all the chaos that was going on. Your volunteer fire department, rescue squad, and your leaders, man, you couldn't ask for a better team than that. So thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Brad. Thank all of you. Are there any people in the audience who have a special story? We've got a few more minutes.
I do.